Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Namatu acharya sati. This is the end of the sixth day, the fifth full day, coming together on this retreat, walking the Buddha's path, the fruits of effort. Now we're kind of over the hump, if you're into humps. 3 full days, so there's 8 full days, 1 coming together day and 1 departing day. So we have kind of sandwiched between those 8 full days. We call a 10-day retreat, which in reality is not a huge amount of time, but it's a significant amount of time where we can come together as we have and share, reflect, turn inwardly, listen, and open our hearts to these wonderful teachings. Started the what I like to call Dhamma Dialogue sessions on Thursday. So the 3rd day that we had those today, and everybody has an opportunity to sit with Ajahn Amaro for 45 minutes, and then with myself for 45 minutes. So that's a whole hour and a half. Not quite one-on-one, but and some interesting themes have been coming up in the sessions that I've had. Few requests for Ajahn Chah reflections or more, maybe stories or whatever. So maybe on the last evening I give a talk. We're sharing if the wonderful Ajahn continues the theme that I have a night, an evening, and a morning. He has evening and morning, so I'll have one more evening and morning, unless he should decide to otherwise. Which we'll have a talk about that. And another thing that was beyond interesting, and something that I've felt from the other evening when I shared more intimately some of my life, and that's related to kind of this last 23 years that I'd like to kind of venture into and explore out loud with you. Interesting how in these teachings we have these 3 characteristics that we're constantly reiterating of anicca, transiency, impermanence, change, movement. And then the theme of dukkha, that it's unsatisfactory, and if we really dig in and cling, then it's suffering. If we can let go, then it's just basically unsatisfactory. And then, of course, the hardest one is anatta. And so all these words have their opposites. So anicca has nicca, so impermanent, and without the anicca, nicca is implies permanence, as I understand it. The opposite of dukkha is sukha, happiness. I don't know if it translates as satisfactoriness or not. And then anatta is from the term atta. And there's several, I think, very key elements to the, anatta, and this has come up in the discussions. And first of all, it's something that it's not, or that you and I, in my experience, and certainly from Lupa Cha, did not emphasize that this is not something that we can intellectualize, we can debate it, talk about it, but that we're never going to understand with our heads, to intellectually try to understand it. And basically his words were, if you try to figure it out or understand it, your head will explode. And so there were a few people in the groups that sounded like they might be bordering on exploding heads. I haven't seen any explode yet, but we take that with a lightheartedness, but it's very true, because this is a teaching that we really don't find highlighted in the same way as we do of Buddhism. And that it is very hard to intellectually grasp or just kind of get our heads around the idea, let alone to penetrate and realize. But that is the key to penetrate, realize, understand, have the full Pacchatthang to be experienced individually by one who is wise, one who has had full insight into the true transient nature of all conditioned things. But there's another part of this, and this relates to when I first left monastic life, so I'll kind of switch gears to that, and then hopefully I can weave this back in, so please bear with me. I promise we won't go to midnight. I think kind of where I left off in my story was that that it was very clear, and it is very clear today, 23 years later, in fact, probably more clear than it was, in fact, definitely more clear, a lot clearer today than it was 23 years ago, why I left, why I needed to leave. And I use the term needed because that's really what unfolded. And so it was an intuitive feeling. It felt right, and there were many elements to it. But as I shared, there was kind of a dream, the I Ching, and a kind of an insight with a fairly simple meditation in the woods across the road here in Amravati. And certainly there was a part of, and I think somebody asked, was, my wife, she used to be an anagarika here, so it's kind of the assumption that, we had eyes for each other and kind of sneaking around maybe, and we make our move. And, it wasn't like that for me, and that's not to be disrespectful for anyone who has or done it in their own way, because leaving is not easy, no matter how one does it. And the longer they stay, the harder it is to leave. And which certainly was, I think, has been true for most men and women who have lived in this tradition. And so there certainly was attraction to the opposite sex, the need to want to explore that. Not just the fundamental of sexuality and temporary gratification that we can have with expressing our sexuality, but a deeper sense of wanting to connect with our heart, kind of idea of a love and a partner and a friend, and things that we can kind of think about or fantasize about of what a relationship might be. And often in the assumptions from certainly in Thailand that basically if you're disrobing, then you want to get married and have a family, and it's all downhill after that. And I think that's a very sad description of people leaving the monastic life. There's certainly some fundamental truth in it, that there's a lot more to that. And so there was, for me, having spent so many years in Thailand, there was kind of that idea of failure, and now basically it's just kind of the best you can hope for is to kind of the drudgery of a layman, just to be a layman, wear lay clothes and kind of be out there and try to get a job and maybe find a nice person to live with, but forget about, carrying on with the path, and, it was really the attitude. So it was really one of almost failure that you didn't make it. And I had one Thai couple, really lovely couple, that were very supportive, and they were up here, and, oh, don't disrobe, I said, you don't understand what you're doing, and, it's going to be horrible, and they were very, very kind of, upset. And I knew they were coming from their particular perspective on it, but I couldn't, stay just because they wanted me to. They had some kind of preconceived idea of what it would be when I left. But after leaving, that I described the other evening, I landed in Washington, D.C., and stayed with a good friend. He's also a Vietnam veteran, a 3-tour vet, and those that are not familiar, that a tour in Vietnam was 12 months. 2 tours was 24 months, and 3 tours was 36 months. And it's very significant because the longer one spends in a combat zone, the deeper the trauma and the impact that the horrors of war and combat can have on the human psyche. And but he was living in D.C. I had shared with him that I was thinking of leaving, and he offered his support. So I went there, and we shared an apartment together in D.C. And I had several months here, so I was able to go around and visit, former students and now friends, and kind of make that transition. Everybody was very loving and supportive, but I knew I couldn't stay in England, as well as I knew I didn't want to go back to be near my my family. I knew I needed to kind of get away from all that familiarity and kind of step out a little bit more, step out into the not really knowing and what to do, and rather than seeking security from former familiarity. And so I kind of fell, and I fell pretty hard. And so those first 2 years in Washington, D.C. were I was very distraught. I was suicidal, not suicidal in making plans, to harm myself, but the distress that I felt inwardly was very, very powerful. And to this day, I can only speak from the memory and that experience. And I've pieced it together over the years. And there were several things at play here that I didn't become aware of for some time. So, one, I was leaving this wonderful, wonderful, privileged life of a Buddhist monk that all of you here have seen, and how the support that it draws, and the love and the care, and people really want to support it, because there's something that's very uplifting. So it's something that the society wants and needs, in my experience, and as I continue to see it today. And so, kind of climbing on board was like climbing on board of being on the Sangha, over 2,500 years old. If we have any sense that this is, there was this person called the Buddha who was enlightened, that we bow to and reflect on and try to understand these teachings. And that's a pretty powerful presence that still is with us. And so being part of that community that has this lineage of that amount of time, just being in the monastic community has this incredible power to just kind of hold us. And I don't want to say coast, the analogy I gave with that we're all crew on the ship, aren't we? That everybody has a job, a responsibility. Nobody's along for a free ride, and it certainly applies within the monastic community. So having done that for 25 years and then kind of jumping overboard, as it were, I really was very much adrift. And I think I shared that it was very clear that the 5 precepts, I knew those had to be my standard. I wasn't idealistic that I'm going to try to sit every day or for an hour a day or anything of the sort. Just I could keep the 5 precepts and continue that as my standard, and then I really trusted that would be all right. But the emotional kind of distress that I felt, it didn't call that into question, but it called into question of like kind of what am I doing? Who am I? What is the point? Because of the despair I felt. So from having this incredible sense of purpose and meaning and direction, letting that go, and then okay, now I'm gonna go off into the world and find my way and continue to kind of tread through and carve my path out through in the world. And so it wasn't quite that idealistic. And the first thing was, okay, well, I probably should meet somebody. And of course that energy and that was there, that attraction. So I kind of fell into sex with a woman. It was not a very good relationship, through no fault of anybody, just I was, emotionally not very intelligent and was, following certain desires. And so it was somewhat disastrous and did not really fill any need that I had, and just continued to kind of fill the need of feeling aimless, hopeless, and so on. And what's very noteworthy here is that, and this came up in the dialogues we've been having, is that in a way, from having the sense of meaning and purpose and direction and feeling a very an integral part of this community and being a leader in the community, being a senior member of the community, and then stepping out of that to kind of a vacuum of like, well, who am I now? What do I do? Who do I lead? How do I live? Really opened up this vacuum that I was not prepared for. And so the stability that I had, the grounding, the foundation, really fell out. Not dissimilar to what I described to you when I recalled my fear of my own mortality when I arrived in Vietnam, very much like that, but deeper and more disturbing in a way, more inwardly unsettling. And so I had a kind of recklessness in D.C. It's kind of like London. It has a good, they call it the metro system there, so it's a great public transport. You really don't need a car, so I had gotten a bicycle and rode that around. But I would be on this bicycle and just kind of feeling this aversion for myself and my life, and that a very low opinion of who I was. And so I'd just be riding this bike, and I says, well, where's the truck? Let me just, kind of butt heads with the truck, meaning just to run into the truck and be done with it. And as you can tell from the emotions, I'm glad I didn't do that. But being in touch with that darkness and that despair is unlike anything else. And I know there's probably many of you here that have experienced that, or perhaps experiencing it. And what's really important is that when in these teachings that we have to have a groundedness. And I use this analogy today. And so to jump to know self is a big leap. And so we need some groundedness. So that's why we talk about dana, sila, and bhavana. So we have precepts to live our life by, generosity in various forms, and then of course the kind of the actual cultivating of this path, which doing dana and keeping sila is part of the cultivation. It's not, they go together. And I think Sherad Ajahn Chah had his cane, and he said, if you pick my cane up here, no matter where you pick it up, from the end, the middle, or the handle, you pick the whole thing up. You can't just like pick the middle up or pick the end up. And he says, dana, sila, and bhavana are like that. You can't just, if you come and you give dana, then sila and bhavana are embedded in that, are really an integral part of it. Or Westerners more into bhavana. I want to meditate. I want to understand. But sila and dana have to come. It's built into the system. It may take longer, whatever, but they blossom together. They're not, a separate thing. And so when we initially come, we're coming with a certain saddha, faith that we talked about, a confidence, a trust, if you will, in these teachings. But I don't think you very often come here, if ever at all, and come and talk to any of the monks or nuns or even the lay guests that are here. You come here, well, this teaching teaches there's no self, so you might as well just get used to it, you don't exist. Or some, kind of insensitive remark like that. So it doesn't start, kind of like pointing at you and say, basically, you're not who you think you are, and, you're just a kind of blob on the planet that's going to die and dissipate and go back to the earth, and, why bother? So that's not how it's presented, is it? And so the encouragement, of course, is where we find where we are. And so the analogy that came earlier today is like if we take a young child, say a 4 or 5-year-old, and they have one of their little their little scooter cars that they can pedal. So they go around, how little boys are, and little girls may be pushing a cart, whatever, and they're having a great time, and it's the greatest thing they have. And I got older, I remember a cousin had one that had an electric battery, and that was just, that was it. I mean, that was just totally, cool. But we wouldn't take that child and put him on the motorway, or even more, put him on a speedway with a, $1 million racing car with, all these horsepower and can go 500-600 miles an hour, and let them go on the track, would we? And why? They're not ready for that. They're not capable of that. They haven't spent enough time transitioning and learning how to drive at that level. And so it's not dissimilar in this practice. We need those kind of baby steps initially to kind of get the foundation underneath us. So we can start intellectually with anatta, but we do need an atta. We need some sense of who I am and what I am and what I believe and how I manifest this body, this speech, and this mind in the world. And if we take that out, then what happens? We say people go insane, don't they? And the world is filled with psychotherapists that help people to try to establish some grounding in their lack of sense of self, self-worth, and understandably so, because it's a part of what's needed for understanding, for healing. So it's absolutely critical to have some kind of grounding here. And without that, then it's like the little boy or little girl with their little toy cars or trucks or whatever it is. They're all right with that. But if we put them in a real automobile before they're ready, they're going to hurt themselves and probably somebody else, and let alone get on the speedway or the kind of high end kind of racing cars, whatever. So we hear these teachings, the suttas, the scriptures, and at one time the Buddha was dwelling at Savatthi, and at that time so-and-so was there, and so-and-so was there, and came, and they talked and asked these questions, and Buddha said, oh, say not so, whatever, da-da-da-da-da, and at the end, in no short time, he or she became enlightened, and wow, just like that. Now, I have no doubt that that's possible. I have no doubt that it's probably true. But we're talking about a Buddha here, one. And if this all makes sense, and if it doesn't, then I think we'll just tell Ajahn we'll take our leave and go now. But certainly not what I'm going to do, so I'll stay with Ajahn if he'd like to go home. That if we embrace it in a fuller sense, it's like, well, we all have different capacity. We see it here. We're different. We're short, we're tall, we're big, we're small. Male, female, and so on. And each of us have different capacities, different abilities, different challenges, different skills, different shortcomings, on and on. So those monks and nuns at that time, it's hard to know, but I can only speculate that they've probably been cultivating this for a long time. So if they're ripe and ready for the teaching of a Buddha, then they're probably, right at that place where it doesn't take a lot. Now, I certainly, feel I've put a fair bit of effort in my life to these teachings. But, I'm not feeling if the Buddha descended down or this kind of magically turned into the Buddha. And I'm going to look over our shoulders, and there he is sitting in front of us, and he gave some great teaching. We'd all be like, whoa, that was like, and then he goes away. But unlikely that, many of us would be ready for the, full impact of that. It's like, are you ready to, basically ready to jump off the cliff? Because the Buddha said that's what you both have to do. You have to let it all go and go. So, 1, 2, 3, let's jump. And of course, we're probably not ready for that. So the really key element here, the key point, as I see it, is this foundation. And so this came up in these dialogues of like that's frightening, one aspect of it. It's perplexing, another aspect of it, when one begins to contemplate the idea of no self. And so it's not a contemplation or as much as it is an investigation of all that's packed around and constructed around the idea of me as Joseph Kappel, as Ajahn Pabakaro, as Captain Kappel, as all these different manifestations that I've had and each of us has had in our lives. It's the combination, and through the investigation, the cultivating, we gradually begin to loosen our hold. But that hold can only be loosened, in my opinion, when we have some stability underneath us. And so whether that's with psychotherapy, maybe some people take medications. I take medication. I have for years. And it's something I discovered when I began to piece together that not only was I leaving monastic life, I never had come home from the war. So I didn't have a clue really what was going on. I just knew I was very distressed and very distraught and very depressed and very confused. And so how long did it take? I mean, it's still in process, but my feet are underneath me, and I can certainly say to each of you that I feel more grounded and present and filled in my heart than I ever have in my life, and that's quite wonderful. So it's kind of the fruits of some of the efforts. It's like, oh, it's true. We go out there and till the soil, and put the seeds in, and pull the weeds out. Year after year, and day in, day out, and so on. And actually, these things start to bear fruit at some point. I mean, it's cause and effect. But it's nice to kind of have some fruit, isn't it? We all want to get the fruit, but not the work of how to get the fruit. So, and there was one other aspect which I don't really need to go into, but there was, some abuse when I was very young for a number of years, and then that eventually surfaced. So these two key things of Vietnam and this abuse as a young boy, and then the trauma of stepping outside of this thing that I really loved, and in my heart of hearts, to this day, I wished I could have stayed, but the wishing I could have stayed is not like I wish I didn't leave, because I see how beautiful this is. It's like, that would have been lovely if I could have stayed, but I know I couldn't have stayed. I would not be who I am without having stayed, but I wouldn't be who I am without having left. And if that makes sense to you, it's they're stepping stones, aren't they? And it's so important to, our personal growth. So if you and I are ill, say we have some kind of disease, or we need surgery or something like that, we go into the hospital. And so if we go into the hospital, we go in with the intention that the hospital's there to care for us, to take care of us. We don't want to stay there. Hospitals are not particularly attractive places. They kind of have weird smells and all sorts of weird things are going on there, and we just want to kind of get in, get healthy, and get out. But you and I don't go into the hospital with an illness and say, well, I only want the doctor and the nurse here. I don't want anybody else in a part of my care. But behind the scenes, just like on this retreat, the behind the scenes, it'd be like saying, well, I don't want, Didier and Maria and Brigitte to manage the retreat. I just want Ajahn Amaro and Joseph, just to do the whole thing. And that's all I need. It's just those two, that's enough. Well, it won't work. It's foolish, isn't it? We need a whole support structure. So I use this analogy in your healing and to me, the Buddhist path is the ultimate, like the Buddha was the ultimate psychiatrist, psychologist, pharmacist, everything that's for, our care that ever lived. But that there's perhaps other things that we use, just like not refusing the staff and everything to help our care in a hospital, that don't want to refuse. There's many modalities to help us find stability in our life, of which this is an absolute key element. But there's perhaps other things. So we talk about therapy, we talk about medication and these things, and most people have an opinion about it, and often the opinion is not very well informed, or it's like, well, sure, I'll take heart medication because my heart, or I have high blood pressure, I'll take medication for that, or I have a liver condition, which I do, I take medication for that. But there's some instability for certain things. Maybe it's genetic. I don't really know. But why would I not then take some medication to help be healthier if it gives me support? And if the side effects are none that, do I look like I'm high on drugs up here? Oh, I'm sorry, I guess I do, so why not? So the point being is that why should you and I not take advantage of all the help that we can get? Because this is a difficult journey, and that's why we're here together. And I was saying to Ajahn too, just like what I'm talking about now, if it was just Ajahn and I sitting here, or just the Sangha members, this would be a very different conversation. It would be a very different talk, wouldn't it? Because you're a part of it. I mean, think about that. You're helping me rise up to share, to talk about what's meaningful in my life, because I feel it's worth talking about, and it might be in some way helpful to you. So this is your talk as much as it's my talk, or it's our talk, isn't it? And so that's what's really beautiful. And you read scriptures and things, and this is very much how the Buddha taught as well. Like the people that came into his presence, drew out what was appropriate, the right thing. Ajahn Chah was exactly the same way. And he kind of gave and served to what the need of the people that were with him. And one of the kind of funny stories, for a little lightheartedness for a moment here, was that you do the water sprinkling, and people would come, and they knew he was a forest monk, and rites and rituals. They didn't do that, so people would come and they'd ask for some of this holy water. And so it's very meaningful for the Thais. They feel it's blessed, it's holy, it's good luck, it's a lot of things. Everybody has a different idea of what it is, so he'd do that. And kind of stick, Yudi mi hang de, be well, be happy, go in peace, and so on. And I don't know if it was a Westerner. It probably was, most likely. No, it had to be a Westerner, yeah. And I don't know if he was English or American, or maybe he was Australian, let's say. Or maybe a New Zealander, I don't remember. And Ajahn, why do you do that? I thought, you're a forest monk and all that. And so he turns and he says, well, if a chicken comes scratching at your house, scratching the dirt around your house, do you give it a wristwatch? No. You give it some grain, don't you? So, and he wasn't being disrespectful of the people that came, that were sincere and bowed to him and had respect for him, but they weren't ready for the wristwatch. They're ready for the water. So he gave them the water. And so perhaps in that, how do you and I know that they may not be back? Oh, wow, he gives nice water. I felt good. Let's go back. And they're listening there. Oh, precept. Oh, yeah, the 5. Wow. I've heard about those. I grew up and my parents always talked about them, and I've never really thought about the 5 precepts. That's kind of interesting. I wonder, yeah, maybe I'll try one of them, just quit, doing this or doing that. And so you and I don't know the seed that's planted, how it may ripen or how it may come to fruition. So fast forwarding a bit in my story, that when I came to, so that was about 3 years in, 93 to 90, it was 91 to 93, so just 2 years. It was certainly those 2 years were harder than, the 4 months alone in a cave in Thailand as a monk, or probably even 2 years in a cave alone as a monk, because it was just a very trying time. But I moved on. I I kind of forget the situation that I left D.C. for, but the next part is, as some of you are aware of this and have already asked me, is that I saw a program that was about MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, with Jon Kabat-Zinn. And I was actually in touch with Jack. Jack had been a good friend, and because he'd left and stuff. And so I had a few calls with him, and he was being supportive and things, because there wasn't a lot of people. I mean, where's all the ex-monks on the block? There weren't any. Very, very few. And so, there wasn't really a support structure. And so anyway, he in one of our conversations, he says, well, I don't have much time. I'm going to watch this program. I said, oh, what is it? No, it's on channel so-and-so, and it's about this guy, Kabat-Zinn. I know him as a friend of mine, and he's teaching this kind of stress reduction stuff. Oh, interesting. So I turn it on. Here's John, and these all these people are on the floor. He does it for people with chronic illness and pain, and lying comfortably on your backs, just feeling the pressure gently as gravity holds you on the floor. And mindfully being aware of the in-breath as it comes in through the nose and passes down through the lower abdomen. You feel your abdomen rising, and the out-breath, the abdomen refall. I'm listening to this. Who is this guy, I mean, he's stealing my thunder. I can do that. So, called Jack the next day. Who is this guy? What about this? And so Jack called John. And off I went to Massachusetts. And I'm really, so many things after that started to come into place for me. And so I went to the BCBS, which stands for Barry Center for Buddhist Studies, at right next door, really in the same property, but, a ways apart. It's country, it's a beautiful area. And, a bit like here, and then maybe across the road, or, a field or two away. And so they put me up, they gave me a car, and I went to study the stress reduction program for 8 weeks with Jon Kabat-Zinn. I think I was the last kind of free training that they did. So there were a lot of John's old friends there, people that became friends of mine, or that I'd known or met there. And so a lot of things kind of fell into place. But unlike many people that have shown up there, I think, well, I'll go there, do the training, and then to go out and get a really good job. And it's not what they teach. They give you the foundation, the basic, and then go out and find your own way with this instruction, which is good. It has a place. It's positive, and it's certainly very, very helpful. Well, what happened is they had a prison project going on, and which was directed by a gentleman named George Mumford, who's become a very, very good and close friend of mine for all these years, since 1993. Since about 93 or 94. And so I got involved in that here when I was still in robes up at Harlem. I became a Buddhist prison chaplain and did that work for about a good couple of years. Really enjoyed it. Several of the prisons up in Northumberland, Durham, and forgetting some of the other ones' names now, but the Durham one was interesting. They had the only women's high security was inside the men's prison, this kind of small little place. And I can't remember. There were 3 women who maybe it was the Birmingham bombings, or from Ireland, and they all came to my class. I think just as a kind of a statement, but they all came. They were meditating, and it was kind of interesting. And then I had another high security prison that I taught in. So I had a familiarity with prison, and I always felt there was a parallel in military life, in incarceration, and in monasticism. There's some interesting parallels, different, obviously, but some similarities that kind of cross over. And so I was very comfortable with that. I was interested in that, and so we had this project that we went in and taught this mindfulness-based stress reduction to inmates in prisons. And so around the same time, there was still this churning and uncertainty in my life, and so one of the instructors at the UMass Medical Center in Worcester, Massachusetts, knew of this therapist that he had, somebody told him about. He was highly recommended, and so I says, well, call this guy up and and explore that. So, I showed up on his doorstep, and a very interesting story. I went in, and I had this. I was living still on, basically the kindness of people. I didn't really have a lot of money, didn't have, an income. So I show up on his door, and I'm kind of feeling, well, whatever he is, he's probably a nice guy. He's probably sympathetic. Once I tell him, I'm a former monk, I'm struggling to get my feet on the ground, he'll probably take me in and, maybe just give me therapy as Donna. And, those were kind of my idealistic thoughts, Right. So I sit down and talk, and he was great. I really liked him. We kind of connected, and I just felt really, really comfortable with him and just kind of what I needed. And he says, but, one, you're going to have to get your own car so you can get here on your own. And two, you're going to have to get a job so you can pay me. Okay. And it was exactly what I needed to hear. I needed to kind of, all right, get kicked out the door. I'm no longer, a penniless mendicant. I'm now in the world. Get a life. And so it was really a good message for me. And so that kind of started my recovery, if you like, my path to seeking more stability. And so I did that religiously for 5 years, every week for 5 years, rain or shine. And his name was Paul, and I would go out, these big storms in New England. You get these big snowstorms, and, not much moves in a snowstorm. And I would go. I had a little 4-wheel car, and it would get me there. It might take a little bit longer, but I'd go, and I'd show up. And he says, Joseph, he said, I've got people in town here that are calling and canceling because of the storm, and here you are coming from, I think it was about 150-ish mile round trip to go and see him. But that's how important it was to me, and it really kind of became the stability to help me reestablish in a new way that grounding that I was missing, and that monastic life didn't fulfill. Now it's important to pause here that I'm talking about for me. I'm talking about my life, which is unique like every life that's here, as well as those in robes and out of robes. So I can only speak from, my experience. So there's, kind of a disclaimer here. If I would have stayed, what have it would have been like? I don't know. To me, it's a non-thought because I didn't. And I left for the reasons I left, and it was the best for me. But that's all I can speak of. And others that have left or consider leaving, or those that stay, they have their own paths and things to work out. For myself, I needed that time. The first time I came back, in fact, and I came for the temple opening in 1999, I think it was if I remember right. I went to Ajahn Chah's funeral in 1993, and I came here in 99 for the temple opening. And I might have come one other time, I can't recollect, but what I remember is I came back and I was talking to some people, and I said, well, it was kind of like I needed, and I came back to Amravati, and it felt really small. I really felt a little cramped. Kind of like I felt when I went into the temples in Bangkok when I was still a soldier. I went into these little monasteries in the middle of Bangkok, and I said, oh, no way, this is like prison. I couldn't live like this. And then I go off and do it for 20 years, and then I leave, I come back, and then it felt a little like that. It was just the headspace I was in at the time, but I really felt I need the world to be my monastery. And I don't say that as as an excuse or anything. That's just kind of the feeling that I had, that was very important, that I had, more space and if you will, maybe the space to get kicked about a bit and not be so protected and, kind of get rolled in the dirt and roughed up a bit and like that life does, to us. So after the prison project ended, was about 3 years, I'd always had this kind of, a very, low self-esteem. Anybody ever heard of low self-esteem? Ever experienced low self-esteem? That's what I thought. Yeah. So anyway, those of us that have. So the idea, my good friend George, who was the director of the prison project, that ended, and he said, Joseph, you should go back to school. I barely made it out of high school, man. No. And so he kind of pushed me a little bit. And there was this college, it was called Cambridge College in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and that's where Harvard and MIT and Boston College and Boston University, kind of the, this big pulsating brain, and, it's right there in Harvard and MIT and all that. I guess maybe a little like Oxford here. I'm not sure what the best analogy, but, one of those kind of brainy places. And so, all right, I'll explore it. And the beauty of this college was that it let you base your degree on your life experience. You could actually take life experience and write it up and get credits for it, which I only ended up doing one, and they had their subjects. So it was in counseling psychology. And then just down the road, like literally half a mile, well, not even that, maybe an eighth of a mile, it started the boundary of Harvard University, which is just, kind of just infiltrates all around and all in this Harvard Square area, those that have ever been there in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So this H just kind of was resonating there for me, and I didn't realize how much until I said, you know what, it'd really be cool to go to Harvard, just kind of this, working class kind of, father and mother kind of working class background. If I went to Harvard, that would be pretty cool. I'd like to do that. So I applied, and I got accepted. And, I was pretty excited. It was difficult. It wasn't like crazy difficult. And you can talk to my wife about that. She was the one that was doing a lot, not the paper writing, but certainly helping me get through a lot of this paper writing, because the reading I just kind of almost refused to do. And so it was a little bit of a struggle. And when I got through and did my degree, I said, well, honey, what do you think if I get a PhD? And she looks at me and she says, anybody's getting a PhD, it's going to be me. Okay. So I was happy, delighted. My mother, sister, and came for my graduation, and it was a pretty big deal. And what it really was is not the intellectual exercise as much as kind of self-esteem. That, oh, wow, I did this, I could do it. And that was enough. I never really, to this day, other than, in some instance, like, well, he went to Harvard. Oh, he went to Harvard. Yeah, I went to Harvard. And they say the further away you get from Harvard, the bigger the H. So, in Massachusetts, you went to Harvard. You go over to Rhode Island or New Hampshire, or you head down south or go out to the West Coast. I went to Harvard. Oh, Harvard. I had one more relationship that was disastrous, and again, kind of fell into sex. And an analogy that my therapist taught me years ago, it was really lovely. He talked about, like in life, that if we have any kind of support structure, it's like the spokes in a wheel. And that a wheel, like a bicycle wheel, is probably the best analogy, that the more spokes, the stronger the wheel, right? So if it's got 20 spokes, whatever the average wheel, it's probably got 50 or 60. I've never really counted, the more, then now they do things besides spokes, but we're all familiar with spokes in a bicycle wheel. So if you only have one or two spokes, how strong is the frame of the wheel and the tires? Is it going to hold any weight? No, it's going to collapse. And so this relationship I had, he was kind of supported in his own way. He says, but look, you don't have a lot of spokes in this wheel. This woman was still married. She was separated, and, they had agreed to see other people and all that. But there was this obstacle in us really getting together. So I was very frustrated, and, it was just, more kind of, hell with making this thing work. And so there wasn't enough spokes, and we didn't have, other things in our lives. And it eventually kind of fell apart, and then I had a good period to really kind of be on my own, and had matured and grown enough to say, that I just don't want to jump into a relationship, that, I'm becoming more aware of myself. I didn't really start any other jobs after the prison project ended, and explored a few things, but this other thing that I won't go in details, but I realized I qualified for veterans benefits, being a combat veteran, and having been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress, that I actually get some pretty significant benefits for that, and feel very blessed because of that, because it's been a really nice stability in our lives for Catherine and I. So I say that I had to kiss a couple of frogs first before I kissed the right one. So Catherine and I met at the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts. She'd come up to study the stress reduction program. And so there was, attraction, and we met and dated, and, as they say, the rest is history. We kind of backed into our relationship. We kind of rented a house together, and then we bought a house, then we got a cat, then we got married. And no, we didn't have any children. Neither one of us were really, we're older and not really, wanting family in that way. And so it's been a great blessing to have a loving, caring person other than my mother and sister in my life. And those of you that are in relationships and various levels, I can only speak about my own, but it's something wonderful to have. But it's not enough. It's absolutely not enough, because if you or I put all of our kind of energy into that, this person, like, that they're responsible for your happiness or, for your well-being or whatever, that we're going to be disappointed. We really have to have that stability. And the good thing about her is that she was alone. She wasn't really looking, but she was open. And so she was, and I had not got to that maturity, but certainly was at a place that this came about for me, and so it's been wonderful to have her in my life, and life would be very different without her. So she's incredibly supportive and understanding. And so 2 years ago, and she was already practicing Buddhism and things, and then when we came here 2 years ago was really her first chance to see the monastery. Well, she'd been out to Baigiri. I apologize for it was 19. I think it was 2001. They did a weekend on Ajahn Chah in California that was really well attended, so she went to that. And, met Ajahn Sumedho and Ajahn Pasano. I think Ajahn Amaro was there. You were there? Yeah, okay. And so that was really a wonderful weekend, kind of her first exposure. And then she started doing the retreats at Barre when monks and nuns would come from here to teach in the States. And so it's just really kind of grown. And 2 years ago, she accompanied me on when they had the Mindful Aging Weekend. And she actually presented at that, and then the Death and Dying retreat that Ajahn Amaro and I did. So that kind of brings you up to date. So, reviewing a bit, I think it's so important, because I said it came up in these conversations today, that idea, and I'd really like to talk about this, and I really welcome and hope that Ajahn will comment, at his first opportunity. Because when I was on the retreat in April with Ajahn Sucitto, I was kind of in a rough place for reasons, but I knew I barely got out the door. I was just kind of frozen in my heart, and just some, a difficult patch, as they say. And Catherine had helped me get ready, and here I am ready to go out the door, and I got tears running down my face, and yeah, I cry sometimes, what can I say? And anyway, I just in the end, I just kind of I gotta go. I knew I had to go, so I got myself there, crawl up. It's about 15 minutes before the talk. I go up and know where his room is, knock on the room. I go in there. Oh, I start crying. Oh, John, I saw this. That's right, Joseph. Just relax. Just be here. Take it easy. Don't worry. And it was so sweet. And it was so compassionate and caring. And it was just what I needed. So, I kind of dribbled into the retreat. I kind of rolled in like this blubbering blob of humanity. And I settled, and I got up to go to the puja, and I got out for the meal, of course. You always got to get out for the meal, right? And I did it. And things settled. And the first night we got a visit of a black bear, and so that woke everybody up. This big black bear came right up onto the porch right outside of the dining hall, and kind of ate this bag of birdseed. So that was quite an exciting event. And, the dullness and depression I was feeling, sorry for myself, all of a sudden this big-ass bear shows up. So I said, whoa, this is a worthy opponent, you know. And the next night, it's so funny. The next night, you know, they put signs up, you know, and everybody was like, there was this commotion, but people were still being silent and respecting their retreat. It was at the end of the first day. And what is going on? You know, it's like something was obviously out of the ordinary. And I'm looking, everybody's out the window, you know, I'm looking out the window, and then you go around, and then there's the door that goes right to the porch where this bear is. And I hadn't got that far, but I go around, and Ajahn Jayanto's actually mother was on the retreat, and she's coming back with this big look on her face from one of the windows. You can't see anything out of that window. So I start to go to the door. It's got these big yellow ribbon caution signs, you know, it says caution in this big sign. Spotted black bear, 9:30, don't go outside. And, oh, come on. And so I walk around and look down there, and there's this just big bear just sitting there, just kind of gobbling this birdseed. So I run up and knock on Ajahn Suchito's door, and I hear him. So I realize they're probably doing a ceremony. It was the moon day, and so they were doing this, just two monks. It's very simple. So they were doing that, and I heard them. So I was, you know, I kind of was patient rather than bursting in the middle of their ceremony. And then I knock again, and they finally go, "There's a bear. You got to see." And I come down. Okay, let's go. So we drive down, and of course, by the time we get there, the bear had lumbered off. So they didn't get to see the bear, but. So I guess what happened is this yogi, as they're called their retreat, they call them yogis at IMS, was going out that door with a cup of tea, you know, 9:30, first day of the retreat. This is definitely second or third hand. I didn't hear the story firsthand, or talk to the yogi, but you can imagine the scene, you know, nice cup of tea, cool evening, into the first night. Oh, I made it through the first day, and opens the door. And I'm not sure exactly how it happened. I mean, you can imagine it is probably all true. You know, you look up, and this quiet evening, and it's just the woods is right there. So it's like, it's wild woods right behind the center. Literally goes into, you know, acres and acres of woods. And you know, right, you know, this big bear eating this thing. So I can't imagine what, you know, he probably just like, went back in. The most interesting was me the next night. You know, it passed and everything, and so the evening ended about what we end here about 9:30ish. And so you can either go through it set up now, where you can stay inside the whole time because it's very cold there. So they've really made it nice, so you can be inside. You never have to go outside to your accommodations, all single rooms. It's really very nicely done. Or you can go out this back porch area and walk down a little, you know, paved area right to the dormitory buildings. And, you know, which I like to do. You go out and get a breath of fresh air, clear your head, and there's the woods, and that's where the bear was. So as I start heading out there, I start feeling bear energy. And I said, you know, I don't know. So I start kind of like thinking, oh, I gotta walk. Oh, this is no, there was a bear out there. So I literally had to, you know, all of the strength, you know, emotional, mental practice strength of all these years, you know, Vietnam vet, Buddhist monk, you know, fighting with mosquitoes and snakes and all the rest of it. I was absolutely petrified. And so this bear was just, you know, in my mind. And so I just did everything I could. So I got out onto the porch and I stopped, and it was very powerful. I mean, it was just like, no, just go back in and, you know, go the inside way. It'll be fine. No, I'm not going to do that. Yes, it's better to do that. The bear, you know, could. So I got out, I got onto the little paved area, and I walked. And it continued to be, everything in my being was telling me to run, or waiting for, you know, this bear to come out of the woods. I just felt it. I was sure, you know, and I didn't know if I had enough time, and my knees, of course, you see how bad my knees are. Am I going to be able to make it to the dormitory or go back? You know, you can't go forward, you can't go back, so you got to do something. And I just felt it. And so for the next several nights, it was worse that night, and then for a couple of nights, and eventually it dissipated. But it was not a rational thing. It was absolutely not a rational thing. It was just this primal, probably from childhood, the dark, and you know, a bear is a worthy opponent. I mean, it was real. It was right there. I mean, it's black, it's big, it growls, it's bigger than I am, and I don't know, it can take your head off if it wanted to. So it was quite humorous afterwards, but at the time I was really petrified. It was very interesting, to say the least. So that was the bear story. So in really in summary then, that, I share my life in, with an open-heartedness that, I don't feel other than, none of us want to sit up here, confess dirty secrets or anything, but that I think openness and honesty has been my path. And certainly say Vietnam and that experience, the more, for me it's more, the more I can talk about it, the more I can relive it within reason, and it's been part of my healing. And so that's what didn't happen for me as a monk, and that was important. But how could it? Those things were not being triggered, were they? I wasn't with other veterans. I was in a very loving and supportive environment in Thailand, and then here. And so the long and short is that I really see that it was key for me to have these things surface in my life so that I could make peace with them. And so having been down, these last 23 years to the present day, see how key and important that was. And so that I certainly encourage that everybody trusts in their journey and their hearts. I mean, I think for most of us that when we trust something that we feel strongly, not from our head or from, our lower chakra area, if we're coming from here, that I think there's usually truth in that, and that we can trust in that. And if we can't, or if that something happens that didn't seem like it was right, then maybe we don't trust it so much. But I think instinctively, intuitively, that we all have a sense. I think that's what brings us here together in this retreat. That if nothing else, that element of saddha that says, well, I'll try it out, or I have a certain interest or a curiosity, a confidence. There's something to this. And so it brings us here, and then how we, move forward from here as we, start to kind of go down the other side of this retreat, that start to reflect really what have I learned? So back to day one, Ajahn, that we're being kind to ourselves and to others, having, loving kindness, and then a heart that's willing to, listen, to be open, and to learn. And so that learning is what we take away. So certainly my intention is to, share with open-heartedness that, in some way my journey and an explanation of it, and is helpful for you, encouraging for you in your own lives, because we all are on this path. How we choose to walk it, and is up to us. And we do have choices for sure. And so I think the more that we're in touch with our hearts, more than our head and our intellect, that we can trust in the journey and walk with confidence. And so it's not so important where we're getting, but what that we kind of have the joy of the journey itself, because life is now, isn't it? We're not certain about tomorrow, the next day, what we have now. So, the Native American have the expression, it's a good day to die. And whether it's a good day or not, it might come calling. And so there's an immediacy, isn't there? Like the days and nights are relentlessly passing. So how well are you? How well am I? All of us spending our time. What am I doing? What's really, really important at the end of the life, and rather than at the end of the day for each of us? And it's there. It's not, nobody here has doubts about that. We have doubts about other things, maybe what we do before then. But, here the encouragement is to seek, to investigate, and to, find that what works for us. So I leave this with you. Have a good rest tonight, and, see you're bright and early, ready to, listen to more Dhamma, and, be inspired and uplifted and all that. Thank you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.